Oh, look who I'm next to. Easy question.
They put names on it, you might.
This is me, isn't it?
That's you here, Jim. Come to look. Well, you're one that fell over. You're on two.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the Chair of Rochford District Council, Councillor Joe McPherson, the Vice Chair of the Council, Councillor Simon Wootton, the Chief Executive Jonathan Stevenson and the Reverend Kim Lepley.
Please be seated.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and could I ask everyone to note the fire safety instructions, which is a slightly different script from the ones we've got used to in Civic Suite, but there are no planned fire drills for tonight. If, however, the alarm goes off, please use the fire exit through the main doors of the hall or the fire exit in the storeroom adjacent to the stage. The fire assembly point is the island in front of the main entrance to the building. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. I would also like to remind you to please switch off your mobile phones or turn them to silent. Please note that the meeting will be live streamed where the proceedings are capable of repeated viewing. Please ensure your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. Thank you.
Members, please stand for the Reverend Kim Lepley if you're able to.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is lovely to be amongst you this evening. Yesterday, Rochford District Council had their Holocaust service here yesterday at 11:30, and it was, to say it was a lovely time is very true. It was a lovely time of remembrance. Today is the day where we remember the Holocaust, so I'm going to invite everyone to observe a minute's silence. Thank you very much. So let us pray about this evening. Almighty God, we bring before you the agenda for tonight's meeting, that we who have been entrusted with the responsibility to govern and make decisions for those who have elected us, that we be guided by the best of motives and with the interests of all for the benefit of all. Lord, give us clear minds and the desire to hear all points of view, including those who may be opposed to our own, and an openness of respectful debate. Make us gracious and courteous to friend and opponent alike, with a real sense of working together for the district and for the areas that are represented by each of our councillors. At the same time, we commend for your blessing the work of all the employees of Rochford District Council, who maintain, implement and make possible the words that are debated, discussed and formed into policy. Amen.
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 I'm going to pray the Lord's Prayer, and I invite you to join in with the saying of this prayer if you would like to. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen. So may God enfold you in love, fill you with peace, and lead you in hope. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, be with you and all whom you love, this night and forevermore. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Kim Lepley. And if you would like to stay for the evening, you're more than welcome, of course. Please be seated, members. So, members, item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. We have received apologies for absence from Councillor Constable, Councillor Gooding, Councillor E. Mason, Councillor J. Mason, Councillor Stanley, Councillor S. Wilson, Councillor L. Newport, Councillor M. Carter and Councillor G. Myers. Is there any other apologies, please, members? Nobody's indicating. Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of December 2025. Are the minutes agreed, members?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please, members? Councillor Mike Steptoe.
Chairman, just as a member of Essex County Council and a member of Barling Parish Council.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Shaw.
The same, member of Essex County Council and Deputy Cabinet Member for Highways. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other declarations of interest? Nobody's indicating. Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, announcements by Chairman of the Council, Chairman of any policy or committee or head of paid services. Does the leader of the Council wish to make any announcements? Thank you. Does the head of paid services wish to make any announcements? Thank you. And I will defer any announcements from the chairman until the next meeting. We have 2 items that we wish to debate, and I'd rather leave the time for us to do that. Thank you. Moving on, item 5, transport assessment, regulation 1813, regulation 18 aversion. The report begins on page 11 of the agenda. I now invite the Chairman of the Planning Policy Committee, Councillor Wootton, to introduce the report and move the recommendations.
Thank you, Chairman. This item presents the transport assessment to support the emerging Rochford local plan at the Regulation 18 stage. Council is not being asked to approve the transport assessment. The recommendation is to note the report as part of the local plan evidence base. Paragraph 1.9 on page 13 sets out the reasons why this item is before us this evening. Subsequent to Planning Policy Committee on the 7th of January, and at their request, a very informative all-member briefing was held in advance of this meeting, led by the Council's transport consultants, Sistra. That session enabled detailed explanation of the methodology and assessment approach, together with the reasoning behind the assumptions, and also gave the opportunity for members to raise and explore detailed technical questions, which are helpfully summarised in paragraph 1.10. The session was intended to objectively inform and support members ahead of tonight's discussion. The transport assessment is an important but interim piece of evidence. It reflects the current spatial strategy being consulted on and the evidence available at Regulation 18 stage. It is not the final transport strategy, and further work will follow as the local plan is refined. So why is the report before Council now? Noting the report allows the transport assessment to both sit alongside the draft local plan and be published as part of the Regulation 18 public consultation. This ensures the transport evidence is transparent, open to scrutiny, and capable of being tested through public and stakeholder feedback. So, the key message of this item is to note an interim evidence document, not to reach conclusions on transport solutions. It will be an important link to the wider local plan process. Comments received during consultation will help inform further modelling and refinement, feed into a more detailed transport assessment at Regulation 19 stage. Tonight's decision ensures transport considerations are fully integrated into the consultation rather than considered later or in isolation, which would be incredibly disappointing, not least for our residents who would be denied the opportunity to engage on the subject through the Regulation 18 stage. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I believe there is a seconder. Councillor Eaves, could I invite you to speak, or would you like to reserve your right to the end?
I will reserve my right to the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves. We have here the recommendation on the floor. Members, I'd like to open this up to debate. Councillor Cripps.
Thank you. I'd like to read on this subject, if I may.
You may.
Thank you. I appreciate, is this working? Yeah, okay. I appreciate this item is for noted, but I think there are some big issues in it that need to be aired. So I would ask you to bear with me while I try and quickly get through it. Bearing in mind it was 444 pages, I got it down to half a page. The transport assessment confirms our expectations, but it also now gives us the magnitude of the impacts, which is worrying. I'll try and explain why. The transport assessment used 29 road junctions to create the model and uses 6 categories from A to F in order to explain each junction's functional status. The ABC classifications are positive versions of operation. The D, E, F are negative reflections. That's because F is over capacity, E is at capacity, and D is approaching capacity. There are 2 cases, each with an AM and PM outcome. First up is the baseline case, representing basically as we are now, which is 17 ABC categories and 12 DEF categories. And that 12 includes 3 already at category F. The second case is looking across the local plan through to 2014. It's basically a do nothing forecast. It warns you what's going to happen if you do nothing. And it changes quite radically. We now see only 6 A, B, Cs, and the DEFs have now gone to 23 junctions, of which 12 are categories F. So I do not see any evidence that the proposed passive model shift mitigation will match that 80% of junctions impact in the plan period. Active physical mitigations will be required. The transport assessment says that to be effective modal shift, it is essential that internalisation pre-provides facilities and services within the new sites to encourage take-up at habitation. That seems very unlikely because the previous local plan also went down this Reg 18, Reg 19 and inspector process and did not provide any internalisation for Hall Road, High Elms, Wolseley Park or Ashington Road. My biggest concern is Essex County Council Highways. They've been involved in this traffic assessment. But if you listen to what I was saying earlier, there's an awful lot of physical work that's got to be done. And I see this as the biggest risk. They've only got 2 more years to live as Essex County Council. And our risk register on the local plan, risk number 4, actually lists that warning. If ECC do not provide the infrastructure, we have to seek a third-party supplier. And the suggestion says, e.g. the government. Well, the government's been telling us for 18 months that we've got a fiscal crisis and no money. So I think there's a real big risk there. So that's why, summarising the 3 things, model shift, internalisation, and our reliance on ECC highways in a diminishing time band. And a general comment is, when this comes back the second time, it will be in a pile with the other half a dozen big reports that have yet to come in between 18 and 19. And it will be fighting for attention. We need to be thinking about those consequences right now. So for me, I think it's a bit more than noted, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cripps. I'm going to ask our Corporate Manager of Strategic Planning, Jonathan Quilter, if he'd like to address a couple of the issues that you raised.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Cripps. Certainly the points you've raised are obviously pertinent to any local plan transport model, and as we obviously went through in the previous Planning Policy Committee and the briefing that was provided by our consultants, there are clearly a number of extra steps we need to go through on the next stage of this work. As outlined at the beginning, this is an interim piece of work, and clearly we need to make sure that the inputs on that are as accurate as they possibly can be. I think, as it was set out previously around the modal shift, clearly there is going to be challenges around that, and we need to understand what the level of the acceptable level of modal shift that can be applied to that model. That clearly is still to be done, and that's for the next stage. Regarding internalisation, again, that's really very much applicable to those potential larger sites. And again, that's something that's set out within general practice around understanding what is possible when it comes to providing facilities on those sites that could then mean that it reduces the chance of people having outward journeys. Doesn't mean it will eliminate them, of course. And of course, around the points around Essex, and certainly, as we said before, we're maintaining regular dialogue with them, ensuring that they're involved in that process. Obviously, they're also supported by their consultants, Jacobs. So very much a case that we're ensuring that from Rochford's perspective that we've got their attention and they're involved in that process, and we'll continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Cripps?
No, I understand the position the planners are in. I just wanted to make my point because I think it precedes the phase where modal shift even comes into the place. There's as I mentioned in the statistics here, there's 12 units, D, E or F, that are already a problem now, and it's only going to get worse. Thank you.
Thank you. And you're quite right. The 2 things, this is an interim report, and we do need to keep the eyes on it as it comes forward again. Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Belton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd actually just like to thank Councillor Cripps for the level of detail and his understanding of this report and the information that he consistently is providing us, because I particularly find it useful. And actually what Councillor Cripps states and the concerns that he raises really do make the case for the argument that we are stating, that we cannot build 15,000 homes in the district. The transport assessment shows us that. Now, whilst I recognise that some of the data within this report may not fully reflect our lived experiences on the ground, particularly over the last couple of years, I do also recognise the importance of this work. Now, residents and businesses in Rochford District don't need to be told that our transport network is under strain. We live it day in, day out. And the reality is, even relatively minor roadworks can cause disruption to disproportionate levels. We only need to think back to Blockley and a number of other hold-ups like it, where small-scale works have created widespread congestion and lengthy delays across the whole district. So whilst I may question whether every element of the report captures the full picture, I do support the need for a transport assessment to form part of the Regulation 18 process, because if we're asking our communities to engage with this local plan, they must be given the opportunity to feed in their views on the true state of our transport network and what it can realistically cope with. Importantly, I'm satisfied that even within the contents of this report, it already highlights a number of clear pinch points, areas where our roads are already operating at near capacity. And in my view, that renders certain parts of this district unsuitable for development unless major changes are made to our road network. When we overlay that with the 2026 transport surveys that are going to be commissioned, this report doesn't weaken our case, it strengthens it for less homes. It adds further evidence to what so many of us have been saying for months now, that Rochford District simply cannot accommodate a government-imposed target of 15,000 homes. So for those reasons, Chair, I'm content to note the report as detailed within the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Chairman. My question really is about the actual whole transport assessment. I realise that needs must, and we must use some form of legacy data, which has been used in that report. It's led to a rather enormous document that isn't hardly digestible. I mean, it could have been written by Tolstoy. Now, looking at this, I understand it's used 2022 data going back to 2017, and things like comments like the modal shift of 5 to 15% people going on bicycles and so on, you know, which doesn't strike as being very realistic. Now, does the leader agree that the lack of a bespoke connectable public transport strategy in an executive document that is easy to read and digest by the public, rather than this cut and paste approach, because it is, I know it's an enormous issue, but already it looks out of date, this thing. I mean, people since the pandemic have had thousands of deliveries to their houses, and with the modern technology, there's a lot of movement of goods going on now. There's a lot of people working from home. East-west connections in Essex, really, for public transport are absolutely awful, really. And if you looked at light railways, they're not there. So all of these things that may reduce traffic and are probably covered somewhere in this enormous report, can we see that we can get a high-level district-specific digest of this report? And that's what I'm asking the leader, that people can actually recognise and easily take in. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, Councillor Milne, I'm going to pass your questions to our Corporate Manager Strategic Planning, Jonathan Quilter, to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Milne. So in respect of the data, the timeframes of that data, I think that's certainly a point that's already being addressed when we come forward to the next iteration of this work. So there are further survey works that are going to be undertaken to supplement that and update that information. In respect of modal shift, clearly there's a lot of views around that, and we understand that. The starting point, obviously, for a lot of this work is national guidance and policy, and that's very much embedded within that, so we can't necessarily ignore that position, but that's also not to say that we're not going to make sure that on a local level for Rochford, that we understand what that means in practice for us. So clearly, and really bringing this all together, any evidence that we do put forward ultimately to an inspector when it goes through the public examination process, we'll be wanting to make sure that work is in line with that guidance. So we need to understand and also that it's a realistic prospect. In terms of the content of the work, now clearly we do appreciate this is a technical piece of work. We understand that there is clearly going to be different levels of understanding when it comes to that. So certainly we can take that away in terms of understanding whether there's any additional guide that can be associated with that work when it's published, to at least provide people that understanding, whether that's from the technical terms that are included within there, or the relevant aspects, or what's contained within there, so signposting really, so we can certainly look to provide that alongside that document.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, just so that I've got some understanding, this interim report will be updated with more accurate, up-to-date data, and the modal shift will be reviewed. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. No, sorry, I should have clarified. So the data that they're looking to introduce is for the next stage. So that's the new data. Obviously, there's new surveys they'll need to undertake. So that will be very much for the Regulation 19 version of this work. And in terms of modal shift, as I say, that's very much embedded in that process going forward. So as the report's presented, there's no further changes proposed on that front. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Milne, does that answer your questions?
Well, broadly, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor John Mason, unfortunately, is unable to attend this evening as he is unwell. He has asked me to read this on his behalf, so that's what I'm going to do. Thank you. We all know that if we do not proceed now with this Regulation 18 public consultation, that the government will most likely step in and make a local plan for us at 15,000 new homes. So we need to proceed with the current evidence in this public consultation to form an initial view of our sustainable needs. Will such an approach be ultimately sound in Regulation 19? Well, yes. Why and how? The Human Rights Act 1998 can help protect residents from government planning reforms and decisions. The Act requires public authorities, including local planning authorities and the Planning Inspectorate, to act compatibly with the rights guaranteed under the European Convention on Human Rights. Councillor Mason says that he has been reading references to this for some years, and his conclusions, and some that he has acquired from other reading matter, and taking notes along the way. The relevant parts are proportionality, which is Article 8 and others. Any interference with rights must be necessary and proportionate to a legitimate aim, for example, housing and environment. Procedural fairness and transparency under Article 6. The planning making process must be fair with clear consultation, allowing interested parties, including communities, to have their say and challenge evidence. We move on to balancing rights and public interest. The local planning authority must balance the individual rights of landowners and residents' amenity against broader community needs like providing housing or infrastructure. So in practice, the local plan, under needs assessments, ensuring housing policies generally meet needs, including affordable housing, while considering potential impacts on existing communities. Consultation and engagement means engaging with communities, developers and neighbouring authorities early and effectively, known as, or we know as, the duty to cooperate, to understand diverse interests and avoid surprises later. Policies, for example, on green belts, site allocations, etc., must be justified and proportionate, considering human rights implications for residents and developers. Evidence-based, use tested evidence to show decisions are sound and justifiable, not arbitrary. Members, we run no risk in agreeing to this Reg 18, acting as we are required by the Human Rights Act, and onward into Reg 19, we propose a new local plan which can be found sound at public examination. That is the end of what Councillor Mason has asked me to read this evening. Chair, if I may, I've got a little paragraph of my own. Thank you very much. Okay, members, as we are all aware, council officers have organised numerous meetings for all parties within the council. These meetings have been designed to provide everyone, each and all of us, for the opportunity to ask questions. In addition to these sessions, there's also been opportunities to interact directly with the consultants, and I'm referring to SISTRA, where members have had the opportunity to ask questions and clarify points within their report. The transport assessment represents just one aspect of the overall local plan. By acknowledging Reg 18, residents will be given the chance to express their views and contribute to this really very important discussion. This will ensure that the community has a voice in the planning process. Members, this evening, let us ensure our residents have the opportunity to have this say. And last but certainly not least, I wish to thank the officers for their time in aiding our understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I've done my best to go through the 600 odd pages of this report. And as I've already said, I do not believe it goes far enough and is, to an extent, flawed. Considering the potential developments coming forward from Hawkwall through to the east of the district, of something in the region of 8,000 plus houses, including those on the border of Southend. The airport is also announcing that it's likely to reach 933,000 passenger movements by the end of this year. We also have an industrial park in Cherry Orchard that is developing rapidly, and there's also a retirement village which has already got planning permission in Cherry Orchard. We already know that the A127 is running at around 110 to 120% of capacity. You have to think of the A127 as like a hose pipe, and if you stand on the hose, the water squirts out all over the place. And that's what the cars are doing. The problem we've got now is at every junction, somebody's standing on the hose. I had a speed survey conducted in the Ashenden Road a few years ago, and that showed 127,000 vehicles a week are going through that road. The suggestion is that that road will reach capacity by 2028 without any further planning permissions coming forward, and is not reflected in the report. Southend Road, Rochford, currently is running at 84,000 cars a week. Priory Crescent, it has very heavy traffic and is continuously in the daytime blocked, even at weekends. Sutton Road, traffic queues run from Purdy's all the way into Southend. And you only need one white van, either in Southend Road or in Sutton Road, to stop and make a delivery, and the whole place comes to a standstill. The report is lacking in data from sources like TomTom, SatNavs and mobile phones. And I feel there's too many assumptions have been made around traffic and driver behaviour. I am reluctant to support this report, but I do, however, feel that it is important to give the public an opportunity to comment on the consultation. This basic report already shows that we cannot accept the size and number of developments that are likely to come forward. The report shows that we cannot accept the amount of development. I will reluctantly note this report, but for one reason and one reason only: to give the public the opportunity to respond to the consultation. And I'm fairly confident we know how they will respond. Going forward, with all the additional data that needs to be included, will strengthen and show that Rochford District is full and cannot accept further development. In an ideal world, we need 2 roads before any housing. one to relieve Rochford and the east, and one to relieve Rayleigh and the west. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. There wasn't a question there that you... No, thank you. Councillor Mrs Page.
Thank you, Chairman. It is my very clear understanding this report work has been in the making for a considerable period of time. It is essential we work side by side with our residents and our community to ensure transparency of this process and ease of understanding the content. Appreciating this, this is a preliminary interim report. It is an overwhelming encyclopedic version, quite frankly. And could this be condensed and could it be put into an executive summary, please? And I'm coming across because my colleague, Councillor Meal, mentioned this earlier. Could I also ask Mr Stevenson and Mr Quilter, what will be the outcome of not noting what the transport assessment for Regulation 18 for this evening? What will be the outcome, most importantly, for the public and our community, and then moving forwards Rochford District Council? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mrs Page. So there's two questions in there. I don't mind who would like to pick those up. There was one around if there was some sort of simplistic précis version, and the other was should this council not note this report, what could be the possible outcome?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think as similar to the point raised by Councillor Milne in respect of the an executive summary or something akin to that, yes, certainly we can look at that in terms of something to get to aid people in reviewing that work. And in respect of the question around what would happen if the report was not noted, then we'd be in a position where the report would not be published on the council's website, and it wouldn't be sitting alongside, if the next item was to be agreed, alongside that consultation. So it would obviously not then be in a public setting to be able to provide those comments. That's really the position.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Mrs Page?
Yes, it does, and I will be supporting this noting this evening in light of that, because I think my residents deserve a right to have an input around it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor James Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. The first question I have is to the monitoring officer, and it's a procedural question, and that is, can members take part in this meeting via a proxy, which has just happened with Councillor Vilma Wilson. And then I'd like the monitoring officer's view on some of that was read out. I don't know if it actually related to this report or not, but in that report
Could I just answer the first question, if that's...
Yeah.
Because I will take full responsibility. Councillor Mrs Wilson asked me if it would be okay if she read out the report. As Councillor Mr Mason can't be here tonight, I said yes. So if anybody is at fault, it will be myself. Councillor Newport.
So the procedural question related to the Constitution and whether the Constitution allows that. And my second point is that what Councillor Vilma Wilson read out, there was a lot of talk about Human Rights Act, and in no part of any of these reports can I see reference to that under risks or indeed any legal aspect of those reports. So could the monitoring officer give a view on the contents of what Vilma Wilson referred to, please, because I'm completely lost. Thank you. So I just need...
I think, Councillor, the obligations referred to around the Human Rights Act are obligations that the Council would consider in all of our decision making, particularly around proportionality and whether the recommendations were justified. So those considerations are matters that we would consider as a matter of course in all our decision making, and you will see within the legal governance sections within the report that those matters are addressed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to speak to the transport assessment briefly, Chairman, and I've previously raised, as Councillor Steptoe has mentioned previously, about the data. I'm not confident in the data. I'm still not confident. We've spoken to Sistra. I've made numerous comments via officers. I can't support this report as it is. I don't feel confident in the data, and I don't think that our residents should have data put in front of them that they too will know is not accurate. And I think that we need to do better as a council, put better data in front of our residents to give them a more accurate picture. As it stands, this is not an accurate picture. Yes, there has been some acknowledgement of that, but it kind of doesn't feel as if we're doing the very best for our residents. So on that basis, I'll be voting against noting the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lambourne.
Thank you, Chair. Like everybody else, I've struggled to study through all these documents, but looking through the traffic assessment, I'm concerned that there is little or no analysis of the effect of the railway line upon the district's traffic flow. Dating from the 1880s, the crossing points cause significant impact on mobility and transitions in the district, in particular in Rayleigh, Hockley, Hawkwell, Ashington and Rochford. The bridges in particular are serious pinch points on a day-to-day basis, and also in times of adverse weather, these are the actual sites of numerous flooding incidents. I'm disappointed that there is no acknowledgement that these bridges also limit the size of buses and thus capacity on certain routes. Can the officers please identify what interaction and feedback they have had from, say, Network Rail, the bus companies or Essex Highways about upgrades to these bridges? And can can reference to these issues in this trade assessment be made, and can they definitely be included in the phase 19 infrastructure and traffic reports, which must encompass the problems caused by the railways? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lambourne. Could our Corporate Manager for Strategic Planning, Jonathan Quilter, answer that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so certainly we understand it's not just about the road network, it's the interaction between other forms of travel. So as you correctly identified, clearly the use of the railways is a key aspect to that. Points raised earlier around modal shift are obviously also centred around that, as well as walking, cycling. It's also about how we use the buses, trains, etc. So certainly that's something we need to understand in terms of those interactions. In terms of the point around those effective pinch points where we've got the physical, the railway bridges and the roads obviously are constrained by the width of those bridges. Certainly through the discussions we've had with Sistra and the work they developed, certainly we need to, in terms of understanding how that network operates in terms of the road network, there's certainly an understanding around those being hard constraints, because there's certainly a lot of constraint, or there's difficulties in terms of changing that situation without significant costs associated with that. To bring it up to a higher level, certainly any work that we need to look at going forward to the Regulation 19 version of this work, and then obviously how that feeds into decision making, we need to understand how fully the network operates and how those particular constraints are identified and factored in. So certainly that will be addressed and is obviously factored into how the model is developed. We interact with the infrastructure providers, so in terms of the Network Rail and rail providers, etc., in different ways. So there's also the other document, which is not before us this evening, obviously, but the infrastructure delivery plan is another key piece of evidence where we have to engage with all the main statutory infrastructure providers in terms of what their current capacities are and how that feeds into that. So certainly the piece of what I'm trying to say is the piece of what we'll have to feed into each other to understand what that means in terms of costs, how that feeds into viability. Obviously we're going to expect developments to pay towards these, in part, and what that means in terms of the practicalities, or whether we ultimately need to stand up again in front of an inspector at the end of this process to demonstrate any mitigation that we're trying to propose can actually be delivered or is deliverable in some form. So it's very important. But yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Lambourne, does that answer your question?
Yes, that partially answers my question. It's just that if we find that when we go to the next phase that we can't do anything about these pinch points, then that adds weight to the argument that this district cannot sustain more development because we are full up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor FD.
Thank you, Chairman. Couple of questions and a couple of points. First question is to do with planning, really. Definition of words is quite important, and I'll read so on 2.17. You get the word significant. Let's just find it in here. And this technology goes off. Now, what's my password? Okay. 2.17. So, what I'm looking at is planning systems actively manage growth, significant development. So, what does significant mean? In 2.1.9, it talks about acceptable. What does acceptable mean? And 2.1.10, it talks about severe. And what does severe mean? Because planning decisions and planning appeals, these words have quite a lot of importance. And people latch onto them and ask what they mean. There's no clear meaning in this paper or really anywhere except what a inspector gives it and makes a decision on. Moving on to with sustainable in rural settings is in there.
Councillor FD, should we take the first three just that we don't lose track, if that's okay?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so those references that you've quoted there are from the National Planning Policy Framework, so they are set out nationally, but they are not clear, they're not defined by that national policy within there in terms of exactly what they mean. So obviously they are an element of judgment by an inspector and professionals in that respect, but they obviously derive from national policy. So this is the same rules that apply to everyone in respect of those items. But clearly we have to be guided by what is set out within that national policy, and that they've not defined the exact parameters of those. Now clearly there has to be judgments made based on whether they're meeting those parameters.
Okay, thank you for that. It doesn't really help, but thanks for the answer. Okay, so sustainability is roads. I think Councillor Steptoe asked, where's the money going to come from for the new roads? Where are we going to put them? Where there's not going to be houses? We're looking at 1,500. And also, I'm for-noting this report because I want to give my residents the opportunity to give some feedback from their real life driving around and using the district for their transport. So we can feed back into the next consultation. I do believe, if I remember correctly, the last consultation we had 1,500 people feedback. I'd like to make it more this time. And I'd be interested to, I've read in the report what you're going to do to encourage feedback. Our members are going to be involved like they were in 2020 when COVID and we all stood outside places and talked to people. So will that be something all members can get involved with to actually give really good feedback from our residents? That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor FD. Jonathan, are you able to?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so in terms of the, I think the point you raised at the beginning there was around the who's going to pay for the mitigation effectively. So I touched on it just a minute ago in terms of anything that's obviously identified within that transport work as mitigation that's required will need to then be reflected within the infrastructure delivery plan. Now that work itself will pull together not just about road infrastructure, but all the infrastructure needs associated with growth. As I say, that needs to then also be tested through viability work, so it's another evidence stream, and that's understanding really what the ability for development to pay for that. Now the IDP in itself will be a very long list. It will have to set out prioritisation of what those pieces of infrastructure are and when they're needed. and also funding sources. Obviously, ideally, most of that will be paid for through development, but there will also be a need to look at outside funding sources where necessary. But clearly, if there is going to be an inability to deliver something that's absolutely required, that clearly will have to inform our decision-making around ultimately what the plan can include. So that's a later decision-making process. I think on the final point you raised around how we're going to engage, I think that possibly touches upon the next item where we're talking about the Regulation 18 document, but happy to just quickly touch on that. Yes, of course, we're more than happy to get feedback from members around what we're intending to have consultation events in the communities, and obviously ensure that we kind of have that proper engagement. You're correct in identifying obviously broadly the numbers that we received in the previous consultation, and we want to make sure that people are well informed to be able to come back on, inform this process, and we can go forward with those comments. So yeah, more than happy to help on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the officer a question. Sorry, Jonathan. Those three criterias which you said aren't defined, severe, significant and acceptable, if they're in planning policy, who can we ask to give us a definition of them if there's a formula out there or something?
Yeah, so we have, in respect of the NPP, or the National Planning Policy Framework, sorry, there is a current ongoing consultation. So we could, for example, raise that in response to that, around the clarity around that matter. As I say, I think that there are always going to be elements within particularly national policy and sometimes local policy around those terms and how they're kind of defined clearly. Now, in this case, as I say, there isn't necessarily a specific clear guideline around what exactly that means in practice, but clearly there is, as I say, a judgment that has to be come to by either an inspector or other professionals in respect of that. So inevitably that brings in potential legal opinions, but I think there's certainly obviously each case has to be dealt with on its own merits, and that's similarly true of any local plan that ultimately would need to have to come to a view about how we've complied with those particular requirements.
Thank you. As I'm sitting next to the chairman of Planning Policy Committee, perhaps I can ask him to feed that into the consultation. Thank you. Is any other member indicating to speak? Councillor Linden.
Thank you. I've listened tonight, and I will be noting and supporting this, but before I do so, there's certain comments that have been made. I have total respect for Councillor Cripps and the work that he has done over the last 2 years. I've also been in the planning policy meetings where his comments have been noted, but I would like assurances that his comments will be looked at and we will get answers, because I know the amount of work that he has been done. We have had answers tonight, and Councillor Efty has just asked a question which has answered another question regarding what we're actually going to do with the findings and how we're going to pay for the findings. A lot of the information in here is saying we will look at, we will review, but what will actually happen in those reviews to the findings? What will we actually do? What work will we do? How will we fund it? Couple of our team here have been asking questions and you've been answering them, but a couple of things I would like the answers to. If we weren't to note TA for Reg 18, what were the consequences? Because I very much so would like our residents to have a say on this. That has been answered, but more importantly, what legal implications are there if we do note going forward? So if, in synopsis, if we could, Councillor Chris answers to his questions to ensure that these go forward and we all get to know what the responses are for it and what legal implications are there for noting. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, are you able to answer them?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So certainly, yeah, all the points being raised are very pertinent points, and I think certainly we need to make sure that, as I say, a lot of this is going to be captured within the work ongoing into the Regulation 19 version of this work. And again, that will have to come back to Planning Policy Committee for consideration at the appropriate time as we go towards that stage. So certainly we need to make sure that that these issues are being looked at and responded to in terms of the positioning on that. I mean, clearly the points that Councillor Cripps has raised are very important, and we understand the nature of where that's coming from, because clearly people who use the road network, they live in the area. We know exactly how that operates on a day-to-day basis. And obviously we need to make sure that the work that we're preparing and supporting what the plan ultimately will have to come forward with is got to be robust. So certainly that is the intent from that, so I'd emphasise that. In respect of the question around legal consequences if we do note the report, now, clearly, as with any evidence document, as obviously a number of those documents that have previously gone to the Planning Policy Committee, clearly we need to make sure that we are preparing evidence where we can, and it's obviously supporting the work going forwards. If you think about the end process, at the point, as I say, when we get towards Regulation 19, that's effectively the final version of the plan. It needs to be accompanied by that evidence which is sound and can support a sound plan. So really that is the important part, really, that all of this work that we're trying to do is to ensure that whatever the conclusions may be, that the evidence that we have, which includes the transport assessment, is of sound nature and can be supportive of that position. So really that's the aspect, obviously, what we're trying to achieve through that process. So I think that's important to note.
Thank you. Does that answer you, Councillor Linton?
Thank you for that response. And just in answer, and if you could reiterate your response to Councillor Efti, all well and good, we're going to be looking at that, we're going to be making recommendations, it will come back to planning, but how will the work, when will that be decided upon, who will decide on what work will then be carried forward?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, ultimately the final, as we say, the work will need to go through the Planning Policy Committee, but the final decision will be for Council to approve or not approve the Regulation 19 plan. So that the final decision rests with members in terms of obviously the work that we need to present to support that position. But yeah, that ultimately is the final decision with yourselves.
Thank you. As nobody else is indicating, I am now going to return to Councillor Eaves as you reserved your right to speak to the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that every member here, without exception, has questions about this weighty tome that we've been given. There are questions around junction issues, which Councillor Cripps has eloquently described. The feasibility of modal shift, traffic hotspots, and the effect of the quantity of housing on our transport system. The data has been promised to be updated to be accurate at Regulation 19. So, with these questions that we've had, as a council, what is it that we can do? Well, each of us have a civic responsibility, and we have been elected by our residents to be able to see these questions asked and to see solutions put forward. So I challenge every single one of you to get involved in finding solutions. For myself, I'm working hard on working towards getting the local cycling, walking and infrastructure plan moved forward. Just to give members a little bit of comfort as well, where Councillor Efti asked about the willingness in the NPPF with regards to significant, acceptable and severe, that is something that we are in the process of drafting a letter to the Secretary of State to ask for clarification on that, because that is, in our mind, deliberately obscure, and so we find it rather disingenuous that these hold so much weight and don't really have clear definitions to them. Yes, we have an ancient road network. We talked about risk. What is the risk of not noting this report tonight? I said when I first started speaking about the issues. Do we not want our residents to comment on junction issues? Do we not want our residents to comment on traffic hotspots? Do we not want our residents to comment on the feasibility of modal shift? Do we not want our residents to comment on the impact on the quantity of housing on our transport system? If we vote against that, that is exactly what we will be doing. We will be voting against, or noting against, public having their say. So I will be supporting, obviously I've seconded it already, but I would encourage everyone here to support noting of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves. And I'm finally going to invite Councillor Wootton to wind up.
Thank you, Chairman. I sometimes think when I listen to these debates, we are at our best when we all come together with the sort of quality of debate that we've had here tonight. No particular order to my comments, but the word severe strikes a chord, I know, in people like Councillor Mrs Shaw, Councillor Eaves and because we attended the public hearing on a development in Ashington, and the most eminent barristers and government couldn't actually put a definition on the word severe, which is actually quite worrying. But that's not a reason for us not to carry on pursuing that. But there we are. I've paid tribute on many occasions to Councillor Cripps and his very constructive comments. And what I like about it is he talks about the various points within the report. And then Councillor Steptoe comes in, we're talking about stepping on a hose pipe and different junctions responding accordingly. And I thought both of them were really good analogies, actually, because that's precisely what it is. But I want to come back. Councillor Mrs Page, I want to emphasise the point that I made in my opening statement. I'll be repeating it, and I make no apology for repeating it. Tonight's decision ensures transport considerations are fully integrated into the consultation rather than considered later or in isolation, which would be incredibly disappointing, not least for our residents who would be denied the opportunity to engage on the subject through the Regulation 18 stage. And I thought you made a really good point on that. In terms of supporting, we end up with, in the semantics of the word supporting, agreeing, or noting. I think many of us in this room tonight would be really concerned if we were being asked to agree to it, because there are a number of holes in the bucket. There we are. I'm going to use an analogy now, which leak, and we want to test some of the data. But in fairness to Sistra, they're not in the room tonight to defend their findings, but there are certain areas that we have major concerns about, which is why I would have difficulty supporting it. And I stress that word, it's not about supporting, it's about noting what they've said and challenging a number of areas through a consultation process. To be clear, the transport assessment before us is an interim piece of work. It is just one strand of the local plan process, so that it informs the wider debate on all sorts of subjects that have come up through the local plan process. It's just one report. And subject to approval on the draft local plan later on the agenda, noting this item will allow the transport assessment to be published alongside the plan as part of the Regulation 18 consultation. So repeating that again. And it means that the evidence that has been produced is not only open to our scrutiny, and Councillor Eaves makes a really worthwhile point, that we all as elected members in this chamber have a duty and a responsibility to make sure that we challenge on behalf of our residents and we engage through that engagement and consultation process. So really there's little more to say, Chairman, other than to ask you if you wouldn't mind going to the recommendation in the report. Thank you very much indeed, members. Really appreciate what you've all contributed to the debate. Thank you.
So, members, the recommendation on page 11 of the agenda is for noting. I will read it out. The Council notes the Transport Assessment Regulation 18 version as part of the evidence base for the emerging local plan, recognising that this is an interim stage and further work will be undertaken to refine and update the assessment ahead of Regulation 19. All those in favour of noting this report, please raise your hand. Thank you, members. If you can please lower your hands. All those against noting the report, please raise your hands. Thank you, members. Is any member not voting? Please show your hand. No, thank you. So, members, that's 21 for noting the report and 9 members against. That's noted. Thank you, members. Item 6, Rochford Local Plan Regulation 18. The report begins on page 609 of the agenda. I will now invite the Chairman of Planning Policy, Councillor Wootton, to move the recommendation.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Tonight, members, you are being asked to approve publication of the draft local plan for Regulation 18 consultation. It is as simple as that. This is not adoption of the local plan, and furthermore, and very importantly, it is not a decision on site allocations or final growth levels. The core message on this item is a decision to open debate and obtain feedback. It is a decision to consult, listen and refine, not to conclude. What Regulation 18 is for the early formative stage of plan making. It is to invite views on the vision for Rochford, the overall spatial strategy, the emerging policy direction, and the draft plan is expected to change as a result of the feedback and the contribution. So what this draft does is it sets out a long-term vision to 2043. It sets out strategic objectives, draft policies on housing, infrastructure, climate, transport, town centres and the environment. And it shares the Council's current thinking informed by evidence to date. What this draft does not do, it does not allocate development sites. And that is brought out at 1.5 on page 612 of the 4th bullet point. And I would commend members to particularly note that point. It does not set a final position on the green belt, and it does not fix policy wording or numbers. What the Regulation 18 stage does is to encourage public engagement. That will take the form of a minimum 6-week consultation with online and paper responses, public events and briefings, engagement with town and parish councils and statutory bodies, all designed to be open, inclusive and accessible. Why does this matter? It matters because early consultation strengthens our local plan. It reduces risks later. It keeps decision making local, and it keeps the Council on track for the 2026 submission without shortcutting public involvement. The alternative set out in paragraphs 1.12 and 1.13, page 613, together with the risks as set out on page 618, alone are reasons why members should accept the recommendations tonight. And that is why, Chairman, I'm proposing acceptance of the 3 recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wootton. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Eaves, thank you. Would you like to speak now, Councillor Eaves, or reserve your right?
Reserve right, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So, members, please indicate if you would like to talk on this item. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, members. We have a short presentation before we open it to debate. My error. And we're just going to pass over to the officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do a short presentation on the local plan today. You have the slides behind you, and also there are paper copies, and I think there are paper copies available for the audience as well. So, as members will be aware, the previous local plan formed of the core strategy and a range of other documents is substantially out of date. The policies within it are old, and the allocations have largely been built out. With a changed housing number from government, this means that our required 5-year housing land supply position is also under 2 years. Our policy position in Rochford at the moment is therefore weak, and the best opportunity to strengthen that position and to get our 5-year supply re-established is through a new local plan. Not only that, but a new local plan can include policies about the issues that really matter to residents. It lets us decide where the growth should be located and our most important areas we should be protecting. But it also takes an overall view of the district to make sure that we are making sure that infrastructure and facilities are all co-located alongside any growth. So the Regulation 18 local plan is, I'm afraid, by its nature, a rather large document, and you have that full document within your agenda packs tonight. But to summarise, it's made up of a series of sections. The first talks about our district now, and through a vision and key objectives, what the district may look like at the end of this plan period. It also then includes a series of policies. Now, these policies will ultimately be used in the determination of every single planning application we receive in the district, so they are incredibly important. And they are based around the themes that you see within those 2 middle slides, those 2 middle boxes on the slide. And finally, as Councillor Wootton stated, whilst this plan does not allocate sites for housing growth, it does show sites that have scored highly, scored the highest within our initial assessment, and those that we think should go forward for further testing, but also crucially to get comments from the public and stakeholders as part of this consultation. And there are some broad spatial principles within that section as well. So then moving on to the housing requirement, in terms of the government's new standard methodology, that requires that Rochford build at least 689 new homes per year, plus a buffer of at least 5%. And this figure is calculated across the country as a percentage of the homes you already have, plus a affordability ratio. We need to make sure that the evidence that we have supports a housing number for Rochford that is realistic and deliverable. As such, the local plan that you have before you today, Regulation 18, does not currently contain a housing target. However, as I've said earlier, it does contain sites which have been submitted for consideration for new growth and which scored higher than other sites. These have been taken forward for further testing, but again, as I say, they've been published for residents to have the opportunity to have their say on them. And just for information, these sites are shown here on this map. There will be mapping within the local plan, and alongside the local plan, if it is approved for consultation, there will be interactive mapping, which will allow residents to go online, to zoom in, to switch on layers on and off, and to see much more detail of these sites to help aid in their comments. Now, we've already mentioned it quite a bit tonight, but of course the local plan doesn't sit in isolation. It's backed up by a huge amount of specialist documentation, which we call the local plan evidence base. These specialist documents look at everything from landscape to infrastructure to the amount of retail space we need. Often they're commissioned from specialist consultants, as was the case with the transport assessment, but also they're often developed in-house. Some of the most recent ones are listed on the slide above, but you'll see there are many, many more of them on our website, as well as those that are continuing to be developed. We welcome comments on all those evidence-based documents as part of this consultation, if approved tonight. So talking of the consultation, if we are approved tonight, there will be a 6-week period of public engagement and consultation on the plan, and there is a strategy for how that will be undertaken within your report pack tonight. What we want to make sure is that everyone who wants to have a say has the opportunity to have their say. So as well as our usual website and social media presence, we will also be carrying out a leaflet drop to all households in the district. This will include some information about the local plan and where they can get further information and how to comment. There'll also be posters, copies in libraries and a number of public drop-in sessions to find out more and to ask questions directly of officers. We are encouraging all responses to the consultation to be received via our dedicated online consultation portal, but we will also have paper copies available throughout the district, including at local libraries, that members and residents who don't have access to the internet are able to access, fill in those and then send them back to us. And then just to recap on the timetable, as you know, we have a government deadline to submit the local plan by the end of this year, so we need to continue to work at pace. If approved tonight, the consultation will take place, as we've said, with consideration of that feedback and further work on the evidence base taking place across the spring and summer before a further document version of the local plan will be brought back to Council in September, a further period of public consultation and engagement before being submitted to the Independent Planning Inspector by the deadline of December 2026. From then on, it sits in their hands as to how quickly they can examine and hopefully adopt the plan, but we anticipate this sometime in 2027-2028. So finally, members, just to summarise the position that we're in, we currently are in a weak policy position with an out-of-date local plan and a lack of 5-year supply. The plan we have doesn't reflect our current priorities and needs to be updated and replaced. This draft Regulation 18 plan is an opportunity for residents and stakeholders to tell us their views on the work that we have done so far, including on the vision and on the policies, on the evidence base that we have completed so far, and that is still ongoing, and the comments welcome on the sites identified for further testing, all of which will be considered carefully by officers and members through the Planning Policy Committee, alongside the further evidence before we get to a final draft local plan later in the year. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you to our Director of Place, Emma Goodings. So members, please could we keep to the agenda item, and if anybody who would like to ask a question, please raise your hands. Thank you, I've got a few. Councillor Mrs Belton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for setting out that presentation and the work that's done thus far. So as been made clear, tonight's recommendations are about approving the draft local plan for public consultation. I cannot stress enough that this is not a decision on a final local plan, which we know is going to come much later on in the year, in line with the time frame that's been presented this evening, and which is the biggest offence of our district, so we must not miss it. This is the opportunity for residents, businesses, landowners and stakeholders to review the draft direction and to comment before we move to the next stage. I urge everyone to have their say. That is the purpose of Regulation 18, and it's what Recommendation 1 sets out. Because our local plan must be more than a document, it must be a shared vision, not one set by this council, but by the residents and community stakeholders too. Now, I want to make something clear from the outset. Our local plan will be rooted in local evidence based on local need and with the local voice reflected. Last year, Councillor Eves, Wootton and myself sent the Labour government a letter challenging the housing targets that they have set us. In response from Baroness Taylor of Stevenage, she confirmed the standard method ensures that plan making is informed by an unconstrained assessment of housing needs. It does not produce a housing figure requirement. Once local housing need has been assessed, authorities should then make an assessment of the new number of homes that can be provided in their area. This should be justified by evidence on land availability and constraints on development and any other relevant matters. That statement matters because it recognises that local constraints are real and that our local plan must be justified by the evidence. Now, I also want to be frank with residents about the context we are operating in. A target in the region of 15,000 homes has been placed around our district, and understandably, people are alarmed by it, including many of us in this room. But the reality is this: we all know, and the evidence so far is already showing, that the final number of homes that end up in our local plan will be far fewer than that. Not because we're ignoring the need for housing, but because the planning system requirement that goes into the plan must be deliverable, sustainable, and supported by evidence, including evidence on land availability, infrastructure capacity, flood risk, and other constraints that are very real in Rochford. This is exactly why Regulation 18 is so important. I, like many others, want to protect our district from inappropriate or excessive development, so we must do it properly, with a strong evidence base that can stand up to challenge, not only now, but at every stage ahead. And we must also make sure the consultation itself is done properly, and that is why I welcome Recommendation 3 and the strategy that's been set out, especially leafleting every home in our district, because we have so many rural areas. If we truly believe in local voice, then our engagement has to be meaningful, accessible and proactive, making it easy for people to get involved, not harder. I welcome the strategy and the simple online platforms and in-person sessions that will be added to provide feedback. In terms of Recommendation 2, it is sensible that delegated authority is granted to make any necessary minor and non-material amendments prior to consultation. This will ensure the document can be finalised efficiently without changing its substance, so that consultation can proceed smoothly and, most importantly, without any delay. Finally, I want to share something that really highlights the strength of feeling in our community. On Sunday, I met with the Save the Greensward Greenbelt campaign group, and they presented me with a petition, this petition of over 1,700 signatures, calling for Rochford District Council to oppose what they believe is unsuitable proposals on our Greenbelt. This is a powerful demonstration of how strongly local people feel about protecting the Greenbelt and shaping the future of this area. I have no doubt that will be replicated in the coming months as we see more Greenbelt related applications come forward across our semi-rural district. I urge all 1,700 people that signed this to consult with us in the Reg 18 process. So this is why I'm asking residents to not just react to individual applications when they land, but to help shape the bigger picture. When the Regulation 18 consultation opens, please take part, read it, challenge it, support the parts you agree with, and put forward evidence, local insight and local experience, and most importantly, challenge what you don't agree with. The strength of this local plan will depend not just on technical documents, but on the voices behind it, and we want everyone's to be heard. To not support the recommendations in this report is to put the district at further risk of destruction by delaying the local plan and not supporting our communities having their say. Let's ensure Rochford's future is shaped by Rochford people, and let's prove that our district cannot and will not build 15,000 new homes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor FD.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, let's go and get my piece of work again. Yeah, here we go. Right, and so I've got a couple of questions. On page 855 on the report, it deals with flooding, and not my most favourite subject, but I know quite a bit about it. In paragraph 1, it talks about sewage. Now, is the local water companies, are they statutory consultees on this, or is it all go through the Environment Agency? And if they are, what feedback will they be giving? And do you want to do that one first?
Yeah, that'd be fine, I think. Emma, would that be yours? Jonathan? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so to confirm that the water companies would be a consultee that we have to consult with. We also have engaged with them in the preparation of the Stage 1 infrastructure delivery plan. So certainly on different levels, through the consultation, they will be consulted.
Okay. Right then in paragraph 3, it talks about community. Talking about the community, where there is a planning coming through at the moment, which is in one district, but doesn't have any entrances or any way for the people living on that development to actually engage, to go to the local village. It all points everything, they can't even walk safely to the local village. It all goes into an actual unitary authority. So what is meant by community? Does that include I know we have a duty to cooperate, but does a whole development which is in one community have to go into another community? How will that be taken into consideration? And I'm being a bit vague because I don't want to get into specifics.
Thank you, Chair. I think in terms of, apologies if I misunderstood the question, but I think in terms of the, if we're talking about the fact that the consultation will allow for anyone to respond to that. So if they don't live in the district, for example, they can still respond in the same way that we could respond to a Southend's local plan, which they had a Regulation 18 last year. So I hope that's the question, but if it's not, I have to come back.
Yeah, that's and last little point. With the feedback we're going to get from our residents, will the feedback forms in the online portal, will that be layman's terms? Is it going to go through any sort of like normal people reading it, so not to get caught up in the jargon and minutiae of planning policy?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so certainly we'll make sure that the information that's put out there is sense checked. I won't take any offence that planners do put some complicated words out there. So yeah, certainly in terms of we want to make sure it's accessible. When it comes to the online portal, I think in the previous consultation, which we're happy to repeat, there were sort of guides that were associated with that. And clearly also in terms of the, for those that may not be using the internet, as we mentioned, we've got the consultation drop-ins. We're happy, more than happy to speak to people face to face and provide that support. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Squires-Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Councillor FD has touched on my topic or my question. It's about users and how this will be used. I don't want to underestimate our residents, but we do have a lot of older residents and residents that are busy. 51 questions, quite complex in some areas. Has thought been given to how we get, I don't want to be counterproductive on what Councillor Belton says, but because we do want as many people as possible to engage in the consultation, but has any thought been given to how easy these questions will be presented and worded?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, in terms of we mentioned the leaflet that was going to be sent to every resident. So the intention of that leaflet is to set out clearly that you don't have to answer every single question. Clearly, what the intention of having all those questions, not to make it lengthy, but we want to make sure that there's obviously key stages within that document that people can attach their views to. By all means, if people do feel that they're not able to engage with that, we're more than happy to receive a response that doesn't necessarily have to refer to a specific question. That still will be accepted. So the important thing is that we get people's views. So however they wish to provide those views, we'll take them on board. So that's the important part. But yeah, again, the information we'll have to support this consultation around communications will be around trying to support people and give them simple explanations around what is intended and what's required through that process.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, it does, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to comment first of all that my previous statement on the previous item, I feel still stands as regards this, but I won't go through that again. But I do have a number of questions. I've been on the council long enough and I recall the last time we were in this position, and one of the things that happened was that we did have a judicial review set against us on the basis that we hadn't consulted the public properly. We did actually win that judicial review, but there were a number of considerations, and I'd like to know whether officers have actually looked back at that and taken into account what the findings on that judicial review are. With the leaflets going out, I think that's a very good thing. But I would also say that we need a glossary of technical items. When members of the public are reading this, as a councillor, I'm struggling with some of the terminology. I think the general public will be have their minds blown away on it. So some form of glossary around the technical items. 6 weeks, I feel, is too short. And I assume, when does the 6 weeks start? From the moment you start sending leaflets out, or do you give it a couple of weeks to get the leaflets out, and then 6 weeks? So I'm not quite clear on that particular point. From my perspective, I would have liked to have seen or had some sort of briefing going forward on what has changed from the last time we did this. A lot of the items in here will be items that have been brought forward from the previous plan. Some of the basic stuff, but I'd like to know what has changed. With regards to the grey belt review, that's obviously not going to be part of this consultation. How will that, once that review has been done, how will that be consulted on? We've already touched on the previous item on the NPPF. It's very vague at best, and we are struggling to understand that. I'm not sure quite how the public are going to. It would be very helpful to be able to have an electronic copy of the presentation that we've had, so members can actually send and start to put information out to their own networks, to various things. So that would be very, very useful, and copies of the leaflet that we can send out through our own networks. I'm particularly concerned about those people that aren't on the internet and can't get easy access to the libraries, because the libraries aren't always in the right places. So I am particularly concerned about those people that will get missed out from that. So that's a few points. There's a few questions in there. I hope the officers can respond.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Our Director for Place, Emma Gooding, is going to pick those up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Hopefully I've picked them all up, but do yell if I've missed them. So in terms of the making sure that the consultation is abiding by all legal requirements, absolutely, that's something that we're absolutely committed to. We continue to take legal advice to make sure that we are entirely following as we should be, and we're very confident that this consultation will be meeting all those legal requirements, as it was found that the previous consultations were. In terms of the wording of the local plan, a lot of the social media and other things that we'll be putting out as part of the process will be about helping to explain that. There's FAQs already on the website, which we'll be adding to. In terms of the plan itself, we are most of the way through a glossary, and if members allow that as a minor change, we're happy to add that into the plan prior to it being published for consultation. Turning to the consultation itself, yes, so there is a formal 6-week period which we'll be undertaking. We're looking to start that on the 9th of February for a 6-week and 1-day period to make sure that everything switches on as it should do on the first day. Beyond that, we hit pre-election period, and therefore we are limited to that 6 weeks. However, what the team and I have been talking about is making sure that those emails that go out to everybody are able to go out straight away. Those letters, as I say, the posters will all be going up to make sure that that is all available from the first day of the consultation. Feedback on previous consultations and how we take this feedback from this consultation. So within the local plan as it stands at the moment, what we've done is look back at the responses we had to our previous rounds of consultation, and we have summarised what the feedback we got from the community was, if indeed there was feedback on those particular policies, because there weren't feedback on every areas. So we've done that within the local plan that we have published, and then going forward we'll obviously do a feedback report to members through the Planning Policy Committee as we start to assess what we've had in this Regulation 18, and then how that feeds into changes within the next version of the plan. The Greenbelt review will be subject to consultation as part of the Regulation 19 plan. The NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, is not the easiest document in the world to read. I appreciate that, and perhaps take that with government. As I say, there is a consultation on a revised version of the NPPF out at the moment, and the planning policy meeting in March will be considering our response to that, so we can feed that in. But again, the glossary and the FAQs and everything on the website, we can certainly help to address that. And if there are particular terms that members are picking up that residents are struggling with, please do feed those into the team, and we can make sure those feed out into the comms and on the website. The presentation tonight, those slides, I believe have already been sent out by the governance team this afternoon, so you have those, so they are available. And once we have approved a final print version of the leaflet, which of course we haven't done as yet because we haven't had a decision, once we've done that, then we'll very happily send that out to members as well, so they've got a copy of that so they can see it. We'll also make sure that members are informed, obviously, of all the drop-in sessions, copies of the posters electronically, etc. If you want any of those, we can certainly distribute them. The rural residents, I think we're doing as much as we can in terms of the libraries and other things, but if you have other alternatives, if we can put a copy of the local plan, for example, that the parish council can hold, then we're very happy to do that. And again, if members just want to let the team know, and we can certainly do that. I think I've got to the end, but if there were any others I've missed, please do let me know.
Thank you, Emma. Very comprehensive. Did obviously not, because Councillor Steptoe's got his hand up. Would you like to come back, Councillor Steptoe?
It wasn't that, Chairman. The officer there said that there would have to be a minor amendment to be able to put the glossary out. Do you need me to formally propose that?
We think that's covered, so don't. Yeah. I'd just like to follow up on something before I go to the next member, because it's on the same thread. Is it possible for ward councillors to organise their own consultation event within their wards?
Thank you. So we are hosting a number of events across the district, and we'll let members know those dates as soon as possible. I think if members wanted additional sessions or wanted to organise sessions themselves, that's something we need to discuss with them, probably outside of this meeting.
Thank you. I believe some of us did that before, and it would be good if those dates preempt the leaflet that goes out to everybody's doors so people can go to. Thank you. Moving on, Councillor Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's be clear at the outset. No one in this chamber disputes the need for a local plan. What we dispute, or some of us dispute, is this draft brought forward in this way on the basis of this evidence and under a process that has left too many questions unanswered. Despite what has been said, this draft plan will form the basis of any plan put forward by this council. I was a member of this council when the previous local plan was passed, and I can say that the mistakes made then appear to be being made again. First, process matters. The Planning Policy Committee was just given 25 minutes to debate a document that will shape this district for a generation. 25 minutes to consider housing growth, infrastructure capacity, transport congestion, environmental impact and community wellbeing. That discussion was then guillotined at 9:30 p.m. by the chair. That is not scrutiny, nor is it transparent. And it does not inspire confidence either in the chamber or among the residents we represent. If we cannot properly debate the local plan ourselves, how can we credibly tell the public that their views will be meaningfully shape it? Now let me turn to the transport assessment within this draft, because this is where the plans begin to unravel. The transport assessment itself acknowledges serious constraints across our road networks. It identifies congestion, hotspots, junctions already operating at or beyond capacity, and corridors where additional growth will have significant impacts. Nowhere is this clearer than around maybe the Watery Lane and Ashington Road areas that members know are already under severe strain at peak times. The assessment does not present these locations as problems that are solved. It presents them as problems that are managed on paper through assumptions against future mitigation and modal shifts. The key word being assumptions. The mitigation measures described are largely aspirational. We are asked to accept growth first and then hope that the infrastructure follows. This is not plan-led development, this is risk-led development, and the risk falls squarely on our residents. But it goes wider than transport. Transport is simply the clearest example of a deeper problem with evidence, process and credibility. Key supporting evidence is simply not in place. Critical documents that should inform this plan are not yet completed, including the Greenbelt study. So our residents are being asked to consult on spatial strategy, site options and growth locations before the full evidence base exists to justify them. That is the wrong way round. Evidence should lead the plan, not chase it. And despite that lack of evidence, recommendation R2 asks members to hand over delegated authority for so-called minor or non-material amendments without any definition of what those terms mean, without clear limits and without member oversight. At a time when transport capacity, spatial strategy and Greenbelt sensitivity are all unresolved, members are being asked to trust that any changes made outside this chamber will somehow be insignificant. That is not safeguard, that is an act of faith. And yet tonight, we are asked to note incomplete and flawed evidence, endorse progression to consultation and reassure residents that everything will be fixed at the next stage. Consultation is not a substitute for soundness, hope is not a basis for a sound strategy, and incomplete evidence is not a credible foundation for a local plan. A local plan must be credible, it must be deliverable, and it must be rooted in infrastructure and evidence that work in the real world, not just in a model. We sit in traffic on Ashington Road now, on Lower Road, on Roworth Lane, on London Road, and I could go on, but I know members and residents in this chamber know where these bottlenecks are and even more of them. They experience the consequence of past planning failures every single day. Where is our infrastructure from the last local plan? A few mini roundabouts. Residents deserve better than being told, trust us, it will be mitigated later. Tonight we have a choice. We can wave this through, despite unresolved concerns, truncated debate, missing evidence, unclear delegated powers and acknowledged infrastructure constraints. Or we can say, do this properly, strengthen the evidence, respect the role of members and rebuild public confidence in the local plan process. For those reasons, and on behalf of residents who expect us to scrutinise, not rubber stamp, I cannot support the draft local plan as presented tonight. I just want to further mention that I'm pleased it's been raised by a number of members and by the chair that previously myself as a member and members in the ward I represent have held their own consultations with plans and documents supplied by the council. So these are full side plans. We never ask for hundreds, we ask for a few, a handful, so that they can be displayed for residents to see, and I would expect that would be the case this time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Councillor Hoy, could you just summarise your question so that then the officers, as simply as possible?
I was not asking questions, Chair. I asked over 20 questions at the transport assessment briefing. I've asked questions previously. It's my right as the leader of this group to make statements about the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chair. As always, Councillor Steptoe is a wealth of knowledge, historic and current. Social media has moved on substantially since, obviously, the last. We went out to the residents for their opinion, which I think is incredibly valid. And as Councillor Squires-Coleman has said, we need a simplified version so that we can all actually get the right responses and we understand the mood of our residents. A couple of questions, please. In the document, why do we need a local plan? There's a lot of information, outdated policies and allocations, best tools, etc. There's one on there which says current housing supply 1.97 years. That's just left hanging. There's no reason around that. Can you please explain that a little bit further so that our residents can understand that? And secondly, local plan, when a strategic mayor comes into being in 2028, I believe, what will effect that have on whatever local plan that we put in place by then? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Jonathan's going to answer that for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so in respect to the first point around the 1.97 years, so what that is referring to is that every authority has to demonstrate whether they have got what's called a 5-year land supply of housing. So in simple terms, that means the amount that you're required on an annual basis. Have you got enough planning permissions in place or committed development that would equate to that amount over a 5-year period? So really, in terms of that figure that we currently have, most recently published figure of 1.97 years. Now, clearly, that has been impacted upon by the updated standard method, which is the target that the government sets for each authority. The number for Rochford, in effect, almost doubled when that was originally published around this time last year, or December 2024. So that clearly had an impact upon those calculations that we've now set out. So that's really the reason why, if you look over previous years' figures, that number has significantly fallen as a result of that. So it's just to be clear. But in terms of the implications of not having a 5-year land supply, the presumption in favour of sustainable development comes in. So that's national policy is then engaged on that issue. So in a sense, it's also relevant when it comes to considerations of grey belt. And I won't bore everyone in terms of going into the technical details around that, but in essence, that is one of the aspects that can engage whether a site could be justified being grey belt. But there's other factors behind that. So there's clearly implications for that. In terms of the mayor, as you referred to, that if as they come in, how this has an effect, the mayor will have a responsibility to prepare what's called the strategic development strategy. So it's in effect a higher level of strategic planning. So that's as referred to as the SDS. That is obviously still, that doesn't exist at this point in time, so we don't know what that necessarily will look like. But there will be a need for I think currently it will be Essex County Council have the responsibility in the interim period to start preparing that document. But in essence, obviously for our process now, as Ms. Goodings outlined earlier, we have a deadline that's been set by government that what is called current system plans, i.e. there is a new system coming in, we're producing this plan under the current system, that they have to be submitted by the end of this year, and they will then be examined under those conditions. So really the driving force behind this is to get that further progressed. And in terms of the tests that will be applied to it by an inspector will be based on the frameworks in place at the moment, which is the National Planning Policy Framework as adopted in December 2024. And we'll need to make sure that can be progressed under those parameters. In terms of the progress of the SDS, the document that the Mayor will be overseeing, we obviously, as that progresses, will need to be involved in that, but they will need to clearly be in a position where they can be reactive to what each individual Essex local authority is producing for their local plans currently. So certainly we'll keep a watching brief on that, but as it stands at the moment, we're confident that on the basis of the timetable set out that we can still progress this plan on that basis.
Thank you. Councillor Lind, does that answer your questions?
It begs another question. The leader has said that we're not in a position to build 15,000 houses. We're currently at 1.97 years worth of houses. We haven't got a green or grey belt report strategy at this moment in time. I can't see how the books are going to balance. Do you know how we're going to actually achieve what we need to achieve?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms, if I take it through the process, so if the plan gets adopted, and obviously that we'll have, as we say, we're going to be establishing what that figure is based on the evidence as we go forwards. the established figure that's set out within that plan will then become the figure that we calculate our 5-year supply on. So if that is accepted by an inspector, if we went down the path of a number being lower than the standard methods, ultimately that is the adopted housing need in the area, so that will be used to calculate that number. What's required from an inspector when a plan is submitted is that you need to demonstrate whether you can demonstrate that a 5-year land supply could be achieved at the point of adoption. Again, I'm going to get into a bit more technical detail there, because in essence there is a way of dealing with some of those matters through what's called a stepped trajectory. So you can apply, in essence, a lower number for the first few years of the plan, recognising that some sites, larger sites, take longer to come online, to build on the ground. So again, that's backed up by evidence in terms of that position. So in short, there obviously is a need to make sure that whatever plan is ultimately, if it can be agreed by an inspector, that we've got a position that is agreeable to them against national policy. So really, in terms of those points, we need to make sure again that as the plan progresses, we've got that evidence to support what we're proposing, and ultimately that is part of that includes whether it's deliverable, and then the associated calculations that come from that will follow. In terms of the Greenbelt work, as outlined previously, obviously that work is going to be progressing and needs to inform the final stage of the document, as with any of the evidence documents. Now, clearly, we've got a number of different evidence streams that will feed into this process. But ultimately, they do need to, as I said earlier, be robust and need to be defendable and sound. And that is particularly important at the point of a Regulation 19 stage. And ultimately, obviously, being tested by an inspector through the examination process. So we'll have to answer those questions clearly, and we'll deal with that at that stage. But clearly, it's important that we progress that at pace.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was
Sorry,
interesting. Did that help you?
Come back one last time, if that's okay.
Go on then.
Thank you, Chair. Are we alone? Are we alone in making our decisions? Are we alone in hoping that the inspectorate will look upon us favourably? What we're doing at looking at other districts, other boroughs, and seeing what they're doing, I know for a fact that Castle Point are in the process or have put in a plan which is greatly reduced on what their expectations were. Are there any other in other areas, Surrey, Kent, etc., where we can actually have a look and see what results they got by putting in lower figures than what was expected of them? And that is my last question. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, are you able to help with that one?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, of course, we'll keep watching brief on any authority that's progressing. You're correct that Castle Point are looking to get their plans submitted. They've undertaken a Regulation 19 consultation last year, and I understand they are looking to get that submitted quite soon. Now, clearly, as I said earlier, every plan and if you're looking at plan applications even, then it's a case that each is going to judge on its own merits, really, so that we do need to have evidence that's relevant to the area. But in terms, I think obviously the challenge is there, because if any authority does demonstrate they can't meet their needs, there clearly does need to be that robust evidence to justify that approach. So certainly, because inspectors are going to be mindful of the implications of that, bearing in mind they're obviously there under the guise of government, they are a body of government, and they need to make sure that they are following due process when it comes to how plans are assessed in, excuse me, in terms of the national planning policy and guidance. So certainly, yes, I think we're as I say, there's a number of authorities that are looking to get their plans submitted by the end of this year. And they are obviously in a similar position to ourselves in terms of grappling with those higher figures that the government published last year. So certainly there is a number of plans that are in parallel to ours, including our neighbours. So there's certainly a need to keep that under a watching brief, as I say. But so obviously from our perspective, we need to make sure that whatever Rochford is preparing is defendable. So that's obviously the important bit there, that we are, like I say, producing a robust set of evidence, and the plan can be defended and on the basis of being sound. So that's the important part.
Thank you, Mr. Quilter. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor Miss Marriott.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is oh, sorry. My question is are parish councils possible hold events, and because I think that would be particularly useful to reach residents in our more rural areas, And could officers be made available, if not necessary to attend, but to help with providing materials and advice, etc.? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe that officers have already mentioned that parishes will be provided. Would there be officer support available?
Yeah, so we can certainly provide parishes with hard copies of documents that they can hold, posters, etc. I think we will need to take a proportionate approach to officer time in terms of the events that we are proposing versus events that parishes might also be proposing. What we are discussing actually is doing an online session as well, a sort of wrap-up session. So if parishes, for example, or yourselves are getting particular questions over and over, we're looking to do a sort of online Q&A session that we can do. Then anyone can access it at any time, and we can send those out. But certainly, again, I think it's probably a discussion to take offline with any individual parishes.
Thank you. And I'm presuming as well, if it was in a parish, the officer could be virtual anyway to answer some questions. Councillor Milne.
Yes, and given the concerns about data quality surrounding the local plan, if we look at Rochford as a sort of an island that's connected in a road network that we're not really responsible for, that's grown in an ad hoc manner, do you think that the best approach would be for us to vote tonight to get the consultation, because at least Rochford can study things inside its own orbit, as it were, because we can study the sites, we can declare sites that are unsuitable. That gives us a ballpark figure that really does affect then, if anything, you're going to talk about infrastructure later on if that ever gets built. And from that point of view, an ivory tower approach, do you think that is a risk? If we add another year on and get a whole army of people to collect data, it's certainly not going to make any difference to what's viable and not being able to be materially objected against sites in our own area that are a sensible number that is affordable and we can accommodate. So that view of taking it from that point of view, that we really should pass this on, I'm asking what your view would be on that, rather than waiting on an ivory tower approach to collect tons and tons of data, which is actually subject also to changes, actually what goes on in this economy. We're supposed to be getting growth, we haven't got growth, we're kind of stable at the moment, going steadily in decline, as Councillor Cripps likes to say. But that's my question. Do you think it's best for risk mitigation to actually accept there's some things we can't shift the tide on, but the things we can, we should focus on and listen to our residents in that area? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Emma, thank you.
Thank you. So as we've said, we do have a government deadline, and it is a hard deadline as it stands, of submitting a plan under this system at the end of December this year. The alternative to that is that we have to then start producing a new plan from scratch, and government has made it very clear that you can't chop and change halfway through. So if we were to do that, we'd be looking at starting from a minimum 30 months from achievement of Gateway 1. So in effect, you'd be looking at 3+ years to produce a local plan under the new system. So for us, and given the challenges that we've laid out, we think it is the most appropriate thing to move ahead with a plan prior to December 2026. We believe we will have all the necessary evidence by the time we get to that Regulation 19 consultation and then submission, so that an inspector ultimately has everything that they need to find the plan sound, and we'll continue to take legal advice as we work through to make sure that we are minimising all those risks that we have. What we also understand is that the strategic development plan, which we talked about earlier, that will be looking in the short to medium term within what's already allocated, what's already in the growth within existing local plans. If we do not have a local plan at that time, then the SDS will have to make decisions on our behalf on both short, medium and long-term growth. So for all those reasons, I think we as officers would certainly recommend proceeding with this Regulation 18 plan, and then again continuing at pace to work towards that submission by December 2026.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Milne?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marriott, I must apologise, I didn't come back and ask if you had supplementary. Do you have one?
Thank you, Chairman. It's just about another way of reaching people. Attendance at our very popular Rayleigh and Rochford markets. It's another way of reaching people who might not necessarily make their way to an event just set up for that purpose while they're out and about doing their shopping. They might be more than happy to approach us and discuss it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, a good idea, and I'm sure the officers have made a note of that. Councillor Cripps.
Thank you, Chair. I always usually hit you with lots of detailed numbers and percentages and all the rest of it. Tonight I'm going to expose myself, not literally, to a more personal view. And it's about my journey in a council. A long time ago, when the local plan concept was launched, I was suspicious, I was just a resident then, I was suspicious that it was part of a breaking up plan, divide the opposition, have smaller groups. And I was almost assured of that, but very quickly afterwards, the regional strategic planning function was removed by the government. That sort of convinced me that they deliberately piecemealed it. We've now got lots of little pockets, and when you're a second tier council who relies heavily on the first tier council, in our case the Essex County Council, that starts to make you wonder just who's running the ship here. So I did carry out a bit of a campaign in the press, and I met quite a few leaders of councils to try to understand how councils worked. And I even put quite a few letters in the Echo and other papers about it when I formed my own view that there was a bigger picture here which wasn't being seen by anybody. I procrastinated for a while and then decided that I would become a councillor with the direct object of trying to make a difference, because what I was watching was the existing local plan being built without any infrastructure, and that's why I joined. I think the CEO will confirm within 3 weeks of joining I had a one-to-one to him, and I outlined what I thought was the bigger picture around here. We're a peninsula. We're surrounded by water on 3 sides. We share one trunk road. We share one hospital. We share one police force, one emergency services, one of everything. And because we're 2-tier, we have to share Essex County Council, the principal council. I then got on the inside of this and involved in planning policy and the detail. And I realised pretty quickly how manipulative the NPPF is. Our officers are pinned down by various rules and directions within that document. And I had some sympathy with that side of their position. But moving on up now to where we've got to, I've lost all faith in it, because we've got this wrecking ball of the government issuing a totally ridiculous level of housing need, selling us devolution with the, oh, you'll be fine, you'll have a mayor, he'll have the authority and the money to give you all your infrastructure. 180-degree turn. The mayor doesn't even get elected until after this local plan has been done. So much for that promise. But the real one that finished me off is one funny that Jonathan just answered to Richard. The 5-year supply. Right. We were running at 4.53 and that's under where we should be. But the criteria is you can deliver 75% of that and you're still not out of bounds. The only reason it's dropped to 1.97 is because this government has given us unachievable numbers that we can meet. So I'll be frank, I've got to a point of disillusion with the whole process because it's on rails and guided. Recent ideas on that, in my opinion, is that planners are now compromised on grey belt, the way it's been set up. We also know that telling people it will be all right because the developers will give you the infrastructure, we all know that Section 106 doesn't get you a GP surgery. Consistently doesn't get you a surgery. The Essex County Council, the education arm of it, agrees to 500 houses in Holbridge, and now we're busing junior children elsewhere to go to school. The infrastructure delivery plan that also is one of the reference documents in there, they spelt it out, just how much traffic we generate, jobs and secondary school, cross-border into our neighbours. The numbers are huge, the to and fro every day. Now, that's totally in opposition, the busing the kids somewhere else to school, to people going over there for school. And the policy is modal shift, stop people driving. Well, people are not going to walk or ride a bike to Upminster to work, are they? Not on our roads. So the whole thing goes round and round in a circle. But as Jonathan was explaining, the 1.97 years, they've imposed that. They've created that situation. And they will, when the time comes, give us up to 20% penalty on that. 20% penalty for not meeting the number is there in the statute. So getting to the bottom of it, poor Jonathan, I even dragged Phil Drain, who was the place director, I dragged him into Jonathan and went through my idea. I was suggesting at that time we need to work with the other two councils on this peninsula in a strategic way and get some weight as councils to be able to influence things.
Councillor Cripps, I know we go for 5 minutes per councillor. You're at 7, so if you can and I'm willing to give you just that little bit extra time, but if you could just summarise, thank you.
Someone's smiling over there because I always go over the top. Sorry about that. So I'll be honest, I am absolutely distraught about the system we're trying to make to work. Planners have my sympathy, but why are we just laying down and setting this? Not us here, but everybody. It's ridiculous. I mean, this government has done more U-turns than any. Come and U-turn us with your policy. So that's why I don't have the faith in the local plan anymore. It's not individuals. It's this mad system. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Page.
Thank you, Chairman. We've heard some really interesting and informative information this evening. However, I really do need to have absolute crystal clear information. What are the consequences of not voting this forward this evening, please?
Thank you. Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think as we've set out in the reports, if the Regulation 18 is not approved for consultation, the alternative would be to then progress straight to Regulation 19, which obviously increases the risk around, obviously with the intention of Regulation 18, as we set out, is to allow for input from the public and from statutory bodies alike. So we need to ensure that we allow for that process. So yeah, certainly that would be the implication there. there is a possibility of, again, if there is a risk around not being able to achieve that, that we obviously then have the risk around the end of the year with the requirement to submit to government. So as Mrs. Goodings outlined, the government has set out that that's a hard deadline. If a plan cannot be submitted by the end of this year under the current system, then we'd have to be restarting that process and preparing a plan under the new plan making system, which only draft guidance has been issued so far, but that is fundamentally a different process, so we would need to prepare the document in that way. So I think primarily in terms of this decision, it's primarily about whether Regulation 18 takes place. Given the timeframes associated with that deadline, the option would be then to have to go straight to Regulation 19 with the risks I've just outlined.
Thank you, Jonathan. Councillor Mrs Page, does that answer your question? I think
Yes,
quite
thank you,
clear.
Chairman.
Thank you. So if we didn't, in fact, you're saying, Jonathan, that our residents would not have a say in this. Thank you. I have nobody else on my... Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief. So, we've heard a lot. In regards to the stakeholder engagement, I'd just like to raise one point on this and suggest a minor amendment. In terms of, I know this is a strategy and it doesn't go into the detail, but what I'd like to see under 3.33, which is the accessible drop-in exhibitions, I'd have liked to have seen a timetable in there of those, because I think we have come in for criticism previously on these sorts of drop-in sessions where they're not accessible to everyone. Some people need to go in the day, some people go in the evening. So I think that we really need to understand the detail and where they're going to be held, because I think Councillor Steptoe said about, you know, it's hard in rural locations, and I get that, absolutely, and we really need to make sure we're positively engaging with those people. The other thing that I would like to propose as well is that in respect to the leaflet that goes out, that is done in consultation with the Chair of Planning Policy, because we don't need it in officer gobbledygook, we need it in plain English, and I think the Chairman of Planning Policy can look at the leaflet and say, yeah, my residents can understand this, so we would hope that everyone can understand it, and we're looking at it from a member perspective. So if that's acceptable, I'd like to propose that.
Should we just take those two, Councillor
Yeah.
Newport? I don't see anybody objecting to those two requests, officer, so thank you.
Okay, thanks. So just going back onto the Reg 18 consultation, fundamentally, I understand why we want to consult with our residents, but the very first question that I know that I will be asked when any resident sees this is, where is the evidence that the infrastructure will arrive before occupation? Without being able to answer that, I think already I could probably tell you that the results of the consultation. And because that is missing from that consultation, I don't think it's going to be meaningful. I'm very concerned because every single member in here, I have seen on everyone's election leaflets, infrastructure first. I've heard it from Councillor Ward, I've heard it from the RDR group, we've said it, you've said it, all political groups have said it, but we're not demonstrating at all in this consultation how we're going to achieve it. And that actually erodes trust hugely, because our residents are sick to the back teeth of more development, promises of infrastructure that doesn't get delivered. And to give you a little example of that, the Fair Glen interchange upgrade, not a major upgrade really, it's a piecemeal sort of, you know, sticky plaster job. In 2018 that was announced, and not a spade in the ground. And what does that say about us as politicians making false promises that they are going to get infrastructure upgrades? We do not show in this consultation how we're going to achieve that. Is it achievable? Is infrastructure first before occupation achievable? We have not demonstrated that, and I think that for me that will just skew the whole consultation, and it is will not be meaningful because the residents will just approach it negatively as soon as it's put in front of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, can you...
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's important to, I've mentioned it a few times already, but it's important to emphasise, obviously, that this particular consultation is a Regulation 18 stage. I know we've talked about that. It's an interim stage. Obviously, the important aspect of the supporting evidence, the key document is the infrastructure delivery plan. And in order for that, so that's obviously, as I say, it's going to feed in a number of different documents, not just the transport assessment, but all the engagement that requires and has been done to date around understanding the baseline with those statutory providers. So very much is the case, as I say, when we progress towards the Regulation 19 stage, and that will need to be supported, that document, our infrastructure delivery plan, alongside the viability report, which will then test whether that is actually a viable prospect in terms of the payments we're expecting for developments to pay towards those pieces of infrastructure, will need to be clearly set out. But in order for them to actually understand what that position is, we would have to have a firm position on what potential allocations are. Now, clearly, we're in that interim position where we're looking at sites that have been identified for testing. It's important that we get that information because that could feed into the IDP in terms of those particular issues around those particular sites, and that can help inform our decision-making going forwards. So I think, certainly we don't ignore that issue. We certainly will need to address it, but I think given the nature of the stage of this process, which is very similar to other Regulation 18 consultations elsewhere, that there is a need to actually understand what the feedback is to feed into that process. Ultimately, at the end of the Regulation 19 and the submission to examination, again, we need to make sure that we've got that evidence there to support the approach. So certainly those questions cannot go unanswered, but at this particular point in time, we haven't got all the answers for that reason.
Thank you, Jonathan. And just one moment, please, Councillor Newport. I'm just going to remind members that we are now at 9:45. After this, I'm going to take one more speaker and then I'm going to go to Councillor Hughes and Councillor Wotton. I think everybody's had a fair debate, so I'm just going to come back to you for your supplementary, Councillor Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. So, sorry, just for clarity then, we cannot provide our residents assurance that infrastructure can be delivered before occupation. It's just a yes or no.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of just elaborating before us, the point being is that we need to understand, we have got the Stage 1 IDP document, which understands what the baseline position is. Yes, we will need to understand, when we get to the point of Regulation 19 and submission, what the infrastructure needs are that are obviously associated with growth and whether they can be deliverable, and also that they're able to be paid for. So the IDP will identify what is priority. There'll be a prioritisation associated with them, and that will inform, if the plan was adopted, the IDP is a very key document still, because ultimately that informs our decision-making when it comes to planning applications and what requests we would make when it comes to Section 106 requirements, as well as informing, if obviously we've got the intent to take forward SIL, Community Infrastructure Levy, that would also inform those decisions around where SIL money could be spent. So it's very important. So in terms of that infrastructure and where it's needed, there's obviously a whole host of different locations and areas where that will be needed. Ultimately, the IDP will be the key document that governs that. So we need to ensure that happens.
Thank you. Right, our last person on this, if you could please keep it concise, Councillor Mrs Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Talking about the consultation, it's either going to be online or it's going to go out to every house. How do you make sure, i.e. say me, I do it online and then I'll put it in on, post it in. So will our figures be correct that you actually collate? That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so in terms of the information, obviously, as we pull that together, whether it's received from a hard copy, if someone's written in, or if they've emailed, or they've used the consultation portal, that all feeds into the same system ultimately. So we do need to ensure that they're collected. Apologies, I may have misunderstood the question.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, I'm not going to do it, but if I got it online and I filled it in, and then I got one in the post, I filled it in, so I filled it in twice, how do we make sure the figures that you collate are actually correct? That's all I was asking. Thank you.
Apologies, yes. So Yeah, so in terms of potential duplication, so yeah, certainly, I say the central system we use will be inputting all that information there. So if there was the situation that someone had written in online and then submitted a letter, we would obviously have that record of that individual have already made a response, and we can add to that, so it wouldn't be missed if they made any further comments, for example, that could be added to that. So yeah, we wouldn't end up with duplication on that basis.
Okay, members, it is 10 to 10. I have to ask for an extension beyond 10. I'm going to ask for an extension now for 10 past 10. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That looks unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Councillor Eaves, I'm coming to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification to start off with. Councillor FD at the beginning of the debate mentioned a question regarding consultees in the water supply. I am aware that when it comes to applications that come to the Development Committee, that sewerage is a statutory consultee, but water supply is not. Is that the same case when it comes to the area plan?
Thank you, Chair. I think the way to answer that is that we're going to consult all of them. So it's regardless of whether they're registered as an official statutory consultee in legislation, we're going to contact them and then ask for views. I mean, we're already informally engaging with Essex and Suffolk Water, for example. So clearly we need to understand what their position is. And as I've already outlined, we have been engaging with them on the infrastructure delivery plan regardless, because we need to understand their views. So either way, they will be contacted.
Okay, thank you for your clarification on that. One thing that was very notable in the presentation that Director of Place Emma Goodings actually gave to us was she quoted that the housing supply that we're looking at has to be realistic and deliverable. And this is something that the leader actually accentuated, that we will be looking to be looking for what we come out of this area plan with will be realistic and deliverable. I think one of the things that is very, we're all very aware of is that there are a lot of ifs, buts and maybes in the stage that we're at the moment. The thing is, obviously, we have to realise that we are trying to build an evidence base. Councillor Hoy and others have all said about the infrastructure issues that we have. Councillor Newport concentrated on the infrastructure first, that everyone seems to latch on to when it comes to talking to our residents. The problem is that we have a situation where we are experiencing at the moment a central government that seems to be using a steamroller method for actually getting housing built. The problem comes with that, of course, that they are more interested in building the houses than they are in getting the infrastructure in place. It's a situation that we are intensely frustrated by, but we are hamstrung by a government that is just hell-bent on actually getting the houses built. So how do we deal with this? I think one of the main things that we need to actually bear in mind is that this is a public consultation. And one of the things we could do is, in our communication with our residents, is to say that this is a problem, and we can build an evidence base to say to government, look, you're the problem, not us. So that is something that I think we all need to step up on our engagement. Now, I'm talking to myself here because I'm not a great fan of Facebook, but I find myself in a situation where I really do have to start using that. The bottom line on this one is that if we are voting against these recommendations tonight, what we are in reality doing is taking our residents' voice away. Do we want to do that? That's the question that we need to answer. So I should be supporting these recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask Councillor Wootton to wind up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I begin, I think there needs to be a point of clarification to a member who raised an earlier point about the cessation of the planning policy meeting on the 7th of January. To be absolutely clear, committee meetings are scheduled to last for 2 hours. That meeting started at 6:30. At about 8:20, I asked for an extension. That extension was granted, but to be fair, there were a couple of people particularly that had come out that evening that perhaps shouldn't have come out because they were quite ill. I asked for an extension of an hour. As I recall, and I'm very happy to have the tape checked, I'm very happy to make a public apology if I'm wrong, but I think the member that raised that point actually didn't even vote for an extension beyond 8:30, so I don't think it would have even been debated in that time. And I make that point as a point of clarification, and I'm sorry I have to do that. But in terms of the debate this evening, the debate I think has been a robust debate, and I just pick out a few things. Officers have got the message very, very clearly of the importance of bringing this to a level that we can all understand. And I did smile at Councillor Squires-Coleman talking about older people, because I guess I'm in that category. And if I can understand it, and I think that was accentuated by Councillor Newport saying that if I can look at a leaflet, I can understand it. But I will be actually passing it round to the leaders, because I think it's important. You can't write a leaflet by committee, but I do think others ought to be engaged, certainly the leaders and a number of other people, so that whilst I may have the final sign-off, we're all engaged in that process. Now, I thought Councillor Newport made a really strong and good point. How can I possibly sum up without mentioning Councillor Cripps, who made some really good points? 1.97 year supply is a vagary of the mathematics brought about by this current government, and we were doing actually quite well with our 250, 300. And we have this dilemma that planning applications coming across at the moment, planners have got to talk about 1.97, whereas in reality, we were at the 5, and it's a vagary of the mathematics of it. And you made a very, very good point. A glossary, I'll come back to the transport assessment, but I mean, points have been made all over the place about the importance of a good glossary, good reference documents, and something that we can all understand very simplistically. How the hell you do that in a 400-page report is, dare I say, a problem for others, not me, but it's a challenge that I'm sure, but you know, we need this stuff to be brought out simply. So I reiterate, this decision is only to proceed to Regulation 18 consultation. It's not a final local plan, it's not site allocations, and it's not decisions on the green belt. And incidentally, the point that was made earlier about the local plan, and the leader made the point very eloquently, that it is for us at this stage to actually put in persuasive arguments, objective and persuasive arguments, as to why this peninsula can't deliver a algorithm worked out target that has come from Whitehall that bears no resemblance. And certainly Councillor Eaves and others, we pushed in letters already. There's 4 letters that have gone into central government. There's more coming, contesting the figures. So this doesn't sit just in a bubble. But the issues raised tonight reflect exactly what I suspect will be coming from members of the public, and it's up to us as, again, representatives of the community to bring those points forward. Moving to consultation now helps the plan to be open, transparent and capable of change. I urge members and communities to engage fully. Finally, I remind members and those members of public here or who are listening tonight what the leader said. Our local plan will be rooted in local evidence based on local need and with the local voice reflected. And you have our assurance that we as members will fight to achieve that. It will not be based on a remotely thought out target in Whitehall based on an algorithm simply to meet a government aspiration which bears no resemblance to the character of our lovely Rochford district. And with that, I will turn to the chairman to take us through the recommendations. Thank you, members.
Thank you, members. So the recommendations are on page 610 of the agenda. I'm moving from the chair that we will take each recommendation separately. So I will read out the recommendation and then take a vote. Councillor Newport.
Chairman, we'd like a recorded vote on R1, please.
Oh.
Thank you. You've got to stand.
Just on this recommendation, Councillor Newport?
Just R1.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Would you like to sit down? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start by Chair.
Could I just read out the recommendation? Sorry, thank you. But I'm still smiling, Councillor Newport, I'm still smiling. Recommendation 1, so you know what you are voting on, that Council approves the draft local plan set out in Appendix A for public consultation for a minimum of 6 weeks. Pursuant to Regulation 18 of the Town and Country Planning, Local Planning England Regulations 2012, noting that this is not a decision on the final local plan, but an opportunity for the public and stakeholders to comment before the next stage. We will now go to the named count. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start by calling the Chairman and Vice Chairman and alphabetically. If you can state clearly whether you're for, against or abstain. So Councillor Macpherson.
I am for the consultation. Thank you.
Councillor Wotton.
For.
Councillor Belton.
For.
Councillor Booth.
For.
Councillor Mrs E. Brewer. Councillor Capon.
For.
Councillor Cripps. Councillor Cross.
Against.
Councillor FD.
For the consultation.
Councillor Eaves.
For.
Councillor Hoy. Councillor Knight. Councillor Lambourne. Councillor Linden.
For.
Councillor Miss Marriott.
For.
Councillor Milne.
For.
Councillor Jane Newport. Councillor O'Leary. Councillor Mrs S.J. Page.
For.
Councillor Sharp. Councillor P. Shaw. Councillor Mrs L. Shaw.
For.
Councillor Mrs Squires Coleman.
For.
Councillor Steptoe.
For the consultation.
Councillor Sutton. Councillor M. Sutton.
Oh, yes, sorry, against.
Thank you. That was against. Councillor Ward.
For.
Councillor Webb.
For.
Councillor Williams.
For.
Councillor I. Wilson.
For.
And Councillor Mrs V. Wilson. Thank you.
Members, that is 24, the recommendation, 9 against and 1 abstention. That recommendation is 1. Moving on, members, to recommendation 2, that delegated authority be granted to the Director of Place in consultation with the Chair of the Planning Policy Committee to make any necessary minor and non-material amendments prior to consultation. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, members. All those against, please raise your hand. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Is there any member not voting? Thank you. Members, that is 21 for the recommendation, 9 abstentions. That motion is carried. Members, recommendation 3, that Council approves the Local Plan Regulation 18 engagement strategy set out in Appendix B and authorise the Director of Place to finalise and implement the strategy. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, members. That one is unanimous. That motion is carried. That, members, concludes our business for the evening. Thank you for the extension, and I wish you all a safe journey home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for the Chair of the Council, Councillor Joe McPherson, the Vice Chair of the Council, Councillor Simon Wootton, and the Chief Executive, Jonathan Stevenson.